if React disappeared tomorrow, what would be something would you get into Angular or go back to play around with Angular? What would you kind of replace that with?
If I was working in an enterprise
Mm-hmm.
and the enterprise was really large, right? There's even places where Angular is better than React.
Yeah.
I think what it is around the philosophy of the tool. React is very close to writing JavaScript, right? Even JSX is just an extension on JavaScript. It just allows you to render HTML and write HTML in a readable environment of JavaScript.
Is Yihua saying that he's going back to vanilla JS? Is that where this is headed?
There are times where I'm tempted.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience that I have felt the same way Yihua has. Who hasn't thought about ditching the countless frameworks and libraries out and just going back to plain old vanilla JS? If that thought hasn't crossed your mind yet, I dare you to check out this video we released last week, all about the 5 weirdest JavaScript libraries. I guarantee you it will change your mind. But in all seriousness, this conversation with ZTM instructor and senior developer Yihua Zhang was truly a great one, and it has so many hidden gems for all you aspiring developers, so make sure to stick around until the end. As always, feel free to check the timestamps in the description below to see everything we've covered. One last thing, if you're liking this video and want to see more insider secrets from professionals in tech, make sure to drop this video a like and leave us a comment down below. Enjoy the conversation. What is going on, guys? Thank you for tuning in. I am with no other than the great Yihua Zhang. Man, can you introduce yourself? I'm really pumped just you finding the time to be here. So just for the people that don't know you, it's probably not many, but can you introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, my name is Yihua Zhang. I'm a lead front-end engineer. I've been a developer for, I think, close to a little over 9 years now. Previously, my background was in the fitness industry, but made a switch 9 years ago into software development with a deeper focus into front end 3 years after that. And it's been a phenomenal, honestly, life since then. And I'm really excited to be here and speaking to you, Aldo.
Man, thank you. Thank you. And 9 years is definitely, that's a good amount of time. So I'm assuming you've seen a lot of changes throughout the industry, which are some things I want to talk to you about later on. But the first thing I want to ask you is actually related to what you said about the fitness industry. I heard that I was watching the Sean Talks, Sean's podcast or his conversational channel. And I know that you said you used to work in the fitness industry. What was it that you did and kind of like what made you make that switch?
Yeah, so I primarily taught strength and conditioning for athletes. So
wow.
I was training like hockey players, basketball players, football players. And I focused primarily on, I guess, like, have you ever heard of Olympic lifting? Kind of like,
yeah. That's like,
snatches,
yeah.
Thing. Yeah. So there was my partner, who was the guy who came from an actual background in training collegiate athletes out in Hawaii. He came back to Southern Ontario. And he came up with these programs where he believed that for a lot of athletes, they could be way better at their performance if there was an inclusion of things that were more like neurologically challenging, as well as like more comprehensive, all encompassing exercises that kind of benefited their sport respectively, would tweak it accordingly. But he had this weird thing where he was born and the wrist bones of his arm are fused together. So he couldn't perform these lifts. So he originally hired me as an assistant, and then I ended up joining him in the business. We co-partnered the business. And that was what I did before I made the switch into software engineering.
Wow, is that common with the wrist thing? That sounds.
I had never heard of it before. It's the first time I had ever heard of such a thing.
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever heard of that too, man. Wow, that's intense. So you made the switch, and this was roughly, so you stopped, I guess you like kind of got away from the fitness industry or working in the fitness industry about, would you say 9-10 years ago, kind of when you right when you started?
Yeah, I would say that around 2013, I would say probably.
Man, 2013 doesn't seem that long ago, but sitting on it now, it's long. Man, so what was like the hardest, if you had to say, like, what was the hardest thing about the switch? Because it's two completely different things. You know, you got fitness and it's like two realms. So
yeah,
what would you say was difficult for you?
I think the first one was primarily that I wasn't as active, like by far, right? Working as a trainer, you're very tactical, like not just tactical, but like physical. You're on your feet, you're constantly doing these exercises, you're staying in shape. Like I've never sat so much in my life right up until that point. So a lot of that part was probably the biggest transition. Other parts of it were probably because I came in with no background in software engineering. I think the hardest part was probably learning a lot of what was required in order to even just do the job at like a basic level. I think that the advantage I had was because I'd come from exercising myself for like 8 years before I became a business owner who was in the fitness space. I had such a large amount of time to just get familiar with even the types of programs, the types of training models, and I guess like a lot of the educational requirement aspects of that, the informational, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I came into software, I was coming in from nothing and I needed to start working immediately, of course, right? To support myself and my family. So that was kind of like where things were. That was probably the most stark contrast if I had to remember from almost a decade ago now.
Yeah, it's crazy because when you really think about it, like you said, it wasn't like it wasn't an overnight thing. You spent a lot of time kind of laying the groundwork for the fitness industry or your business that you had going on, and then completely making a switch. And I'm assuming that you didn't have like really any knowledge of like the industry of the software engineering industry before that switch, or maybe just minor before you.
Absolutely nothing. I didn't even know that like Facebook and Google were companies. I just thought they were just things that you used on your computer. Like, I didn't know there was like an industry behind it at all, right? So it was like learning everything all of a sudden. I had no clue, zero clue. I didn't know anything about like the way that the software industry was like eating the world, right? Like from even an investment and business standpoint, like nothing, absolutely zero knowledge at all in any way.
You know what? That makes me feel a little bit better because it was hard for me at first when I transitioned into learning the code, and at least I had something. So that's definitely fun to hear, man. And how exactly did you do it? So you went from the fitness industry, and we talked about the hardest challenge, but what were the first couple steps you took when you were like, you know what, I want to do this? Like, do you remember like what was kind of the mindset? How are you going to learn this stuff?
Yeah, so I was already so we needed a website. That was the main thing for the business. And I was like, you know what? How hard can it be? Let me learn it, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, we had to stay scrappy too, right? We're like a local gym. There was only so much we could do in terms of hiring people, and we didn't know how to navigate any of that stuff, right? My partner knew equally less than I did when it came to the business of I guess just software. Yeah. So I started like trying to do it, and I was like, oh, this is much harder than I thought it was. But it was interesting. My degree is completely unrelated. I'm in philosophy and political science, but the philosophy side of my degree was primarily in argumentation theory and logical structures. So there was like a lot of like very similar logical flows that you could see in like kind of the gates when it comes to like, determining what logic derivation you want to make, like with if statements, anything like that. So in that sense, I kind of felt like I might be able to do it. And that's kind of how I started thinking about like, oh man, in order to build a better website, maybe I could take like a course or something. But I got kind of lucky because my ex-girlfriend at that time, she was friends with somebody who ran BitMaker, which is a boot camp out in Toronto. And I met him at a party, and he was like, hey, like, I do this thing. This is what BitMaker is. And at the time, I had to leave my job or just like my business as well, because I was developing mild sciatica. Like at the time, there wasn't a lot of information like or as readily available as it is now. Like the fitness industry has evolved a lot now. Education, information is like a lot more science backed, right? People are practicing a lot more safer training standards. Back then, when I first learned, I kind of just started doing Olympic lifting like in the school university gym. And that's kind of like I did it for 3 years until I picked it up. But you can't do it so frequently, right? Especially because it's such a large strain on your body. And I was like, oh man, I'm like 22 and I have these issues. I probably need to do something else. And this guy was like, hey, you could take this boot camp and in 3 years you could be at a 6-figure salary. Like it's very common. And I was like, oh wow, okay, well, I was looking to get out anyway, so I sold my part of the company, and then I took some other savings that I had, and I booked into this boot camp, which was like a 3-month intensive, and that's how I got into it.
Wow, that's intense. That's intense. Dude, so the Olympic lifts, like you said, are extremely straining, and just because I'm really curious about that, like, is that because I'm assuming you really started because you enjoyed that stuff. So how do you
Yeah.
balance it now with kind of like the strain on the body and the injuries? I'm assuming you didn't just fully just kind of leave it in the past, or what's up with that?
So up until COVID is when I was still very actively like exercising,
Mm,
almost like six times a week, like still very dedicated to my diet, my training program, like
yeah,
extreme programming, like in terms of athletics. But
yeah,
then
yeah,
COVID
yeah.
came. I was out in San Francisco at that time. It was like a very harsh shutdown in California, and there was just no way that I could exercise, especially not in the small condo I had in California.
Yeah.
So at that point, since then, like my training has really declined. I've now started to try and pick up more like running, especially because I'm older.
Hmm.
The joints aren't the same anymore. I had the sciatica up until I was say like 27, 28. I was actively getting like rehab, actively getting like RMT on it, and it
That's
has
intense.
largely recovered. Um,
Mm,
but I think like, yeah, I was really, really interested in it. Like I was very passionate about it from even like my own goal standpoint around it. So not doing it now has been an interesting transition. There's been a lot of pros and cons.
yeah,
Um, more, I would say more pros than cons potentially.
yeah, yeah.
Just because the fitness industry, it kind of like it was very hard for me to approach it from a perspective where I was mentally not from like a very toxic place.
Mm,
In terms of like a lot of it, like what brings when I got into it, I was 13, right? And to get into it to the extent that I did, it was very much like I got to be bigger, I got to be more attractive, I got to be more, I got to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who are like,
yeah. Kind of the
the
superficial.
exactly,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, and kind of distancing from that now is probably where a lot of the positives have come with it.
Yeah, I feel like also, just so the people know, we're not talking about fitness the entire interview, but I feel like one of the things with the fitness industry, unfortunately, is sometimes it becomes a little. I don't want to say toxic because that's not what I mean, but it's like in a way, it's like they try to push this, or a lot of people try to push this ideology where it's absolutely kind of going in fully repping out every single time, or absolutely just
Yeah,
going, balls to the walls for
yeah,
just like a lack of words.
yeah.
And I feel like as I've gotten older, maybe I'm incorrect. I don't know everything, but as I've gotten older, I feel like kind of moderation in training has helped me a lot. So I definitely kind of relate to that.
Yeah, I mean, I see you got the Gymshark shirt, so I was like, "Oh, Aldo's a gym guy for sure."
More so nowadays, Jiu-Jitsu. I did MMA for a very long
No
time.
way. I've
Yeah.
been meaning to get into it, like to try it out.
Oh man,
Jiu-Jitsu.
I think you would love it. Jiu-Jitsu is a great starting point, like to the like an entry gate to the world of MMA. And Jiu-Jitsu is something that you can do. Like I've had sparring partners or training partners on the mats that have been 60, 65, 70 years old, and they still go at it, man.
My biggest fear is staph infection. I've heard it's like, have you ever had it? Have you ever gotten staph?
No, I have never
Okay.
gotten staph. It really depends on. You can tell really quickly the type of gym that it is, because most of the gyms I've been to, there's like a very like strict process about how those bats are cleaned, and they have steamers and all these disinfectants, and all that stuff. So it really depends, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe give it a shot, because you definitely don't want to let the fear of that
Yeah,
kind of
it's
stop
true.
you. You know what I mean?
It's
It's
very
really
true.
cool, and it teaches you so much discipline and all. It's probably one of the best decisions I've made.
You know what? Yeah, I think I'm gonna sign up at least for an entry, like just to try
Yeah,
it.
free
Yeah.
trial. They'll give you like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
week
yeah.
trial. You go to the classes, man. It's great. It's great. You gotta keep me in the loop on that now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. So let's bring it up now. And so you learned the code, and it took you a bit of time, and you spent time learning the code, and then kind of where did you work? So what was the entry points into like the actual software engineering industry once you knew kind of what you were doing and all that stuff?
Yeah, so the boot camp taught us Ruby on Rails, but it was
Ah,
very much like a taste, I would say. I think much of people, I would say 99% of people aren't able to become like truly professional in terms of like just your skill set to actually build like full scale applications or even like
mhm,
portions of applications from even a 3 month intensive. You really do need to work in a company that has like a very mentoring type of program in it, just because
mhm.
companies understand that like if you're hiring juniors, they're unfamiliar, even coming out of university, with a background of the actual requirements of what it means to work in a professional coding environment. So I finished that, but I mean, I felt like I was entrepreneurial minded still, because I just owned my gym and all that stuff. And I actually started a business with another student at the time, which honestly, we were so naive to think that we could do it. We had built like this online teaching platform, and we did that for a few months before I think I was starting to just realize, I was like, this is so complicated. Like, we're constantly doing things we have no idea, like even remotely, whether or not it's good or not. And that was when I was like, okay, I need to find a job. And I found one, luckily, through a friend of a friend who owned a company like around where I was living. And it was like a small startup, primarily in the professional education space. So when I say professional education, I want to say more so actually like training. So kind of like when you're at a large enterprise and you have to go through corporate training, there's like these specific softwares or web applications that load in these training modules. And that was the company. I was there for about a year and a half, but that company was really great because the company was small and the CTO was very, very much like a very good mentor. He had a very strong belief around if you ask him a question, he will not only help you understand, but he'll try and understand where you're missing and asking those questions.
Yeah, where you're missing the knowledge and kind of that's great, actually.
Yeah, so that was really beneficial to me. And then after that, I went to, at the time, probably one of the most stellar companies ever. It's called Wrangle, and that company was at the time one of, I would say globally, probably top 5 digital transformation agencies, and it was a life-changing experience working there. And I think that's really what set me up for the rest of my career. Just
that really kind of laid the groundwork, if I'm getting that right.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. I also did you think though the other I forgot the name of it, but the other company that you were mentioning, the fact that the CTO was kind of the way they broke that down, that's actually really, I feel like I never really hear either people will give you the answer or they'll give you a quick kind of like explanation, but like going in depth and stuff like that can be really beneficial. So
yeah,
really
that company, that company was called SkyPrep. SkyPrep was the first one. Wrangle was the one.
Gotcha. Okay, so now, at this point, you got the experience you're working, and how did you get to meet? Because I know that you were one of the first if not the first after Andre, to come onto the Zero to Mastery team. I kind of want to hear some of like what was the introduction to that, and how was the what was Andre's like proposal? How did that go? What was the introduction as ETM in that sense?
Yeah, so Andre also worked at Wrangle. That was the thing. So
that was the connection.
Exactly.
Got it.
And Wrangle had such a strong reputation, especially amongst us who worked in the company, that we pretty much knew like that if you came from Wrangle, you were probably pretty good. But I mean, of course, Andre didn't know if I could teach, right? Him and I never actually worked together, but we kind of met a couple of times in like common areas where we were both just chatting about common interests, right? Andre is extremely active. He's probably one of the most accomplished and active people I've ever met. He does these insane races, right? He has scaled Everest. Like, he's a really, really just interesting person from like an athletic standpoint. And the person that was my senior engineer, he actually approached him first for doing a React course, but that person just his name was Abdullah, just didn't have enough time to do so. And he was like, oh, hey, Yihua was actually in, so at the time I was working remotely for Wrangle in Amsterdam. And I had a lot of space because I had just left Wrangle, just because like there were some internal things with my visa that were creating issues. And I had this huge chunk of time, and it just all timing worked out that way. Abdullah introduced me to Andre when this opportunity. I mean, I met Andre. Andre was like, yeah, let's give it a try. And that was pretty much how it went.
Wow, man. It's funny that you mentioned the whole, because Andre, by far, I completely agree with you, is I feel like every time I follow him on Instagram and stuff, and every time he posts, it's either rock climbing or surfing or hiking or doing some home workout in his like gym that he built. He is extremely intense, man. He works out very hard, which is just like on another level. I would love to get him on, but as you probably know, Andre's a little bit not a big camera guy. But hopefully we can get him on soon, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andre is somebody who I knew was like, no matter what he did, he would go 150%, right? He just pedal to the
Committed.
metal, take it as committed as possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
no,
think
I definitely get
I
that from
knew
him.
that at least from that standpoint, I was like, oh, I could trust this guy from just like a work ethic standpoint.
Yeah, he's definitely. You could see why kind of ZTM has gotten as big as it's gotten, because he just has a lot of drive. But on to another point. So we spoke about this before this chit chat or this podcast, whatever you want to call it. We spoke about, for the people that don't know. So I before I started working for ZTM, I took courses on the academy, and the first two courses that I took were the complete React course and then the Master the Coding Interview for FANG Companies course, which are both Yihua's courses. So for the people that don't, by the way, super amazing courses, man. They're the reason why I was super pumped to get to even apply to ZTM when this opening came to be. And now it's crazy that I work here, but I honestly appreciate those courses because they taught me what I know now. But one thing I want to ask you is, for the people that don't know your two courses, maybe we're getting listeners that have no idea what any of this that we just mentioned is. So can you give us a quick little breakdown of your courses and what's up with that? You have 3 courses, correct?
Yeah,
Or
I have 3 now.
3 now.
Yeah, two and a half technically.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just break down the differences on all 3, and just so people kind of have an understanding of like what you teach at the academy.
Yeah, so the first course that I launched was the React course. It's probably my most successful course. And that one is just a comprehensive deep dive into what it's like to build a full suite web application in React. Everything from deployment, all the common tools that you'll use, as well as all the best practices within React. I teach it all in that course. And it's the first course I've done. I think early last year, I did a full refresh where I redid the entire course from scratch, just because there were so many big changes between when I first recorded the course and where the course was at that point. And it just felt like I had to redo it because the overall perspective and narrative around React was changing so significantly that a lot of the concepts I was teaching were not necessarily the same anymore. So that's the first course. That's the React course. Mastering the Coding Interview was one where at the time I felt like there was a very large gap between just like the complexity of coming into interviewing for these FANG companies, which is an extremely challenging process. It requires an enormous amount of learning, especially if you don't come from a computer science background. If you don't come from the background, you don't even know the concepts that they're going to ask you in these interviews. Even if you've been a professional developer for a long time, particularly on the front end, just because it's very heavily into data structures and algorithms, which is a pretty wide sweeping topic that gets covered in university. But then even then, like applying them into these practical like puzzles that they really test you on, that requires like a long, arduous, I guess, like some people call it a grind, which it kind of is. But at the time, I spent like a year and a half essentially preparing myself, interviewing at all these FANG companies, getting offers. But I think like when I was going through the process, a lot of what I was feeling was that like I wish there was a way that this could be structured in a more comprehensive way, because traditionally a lot of the times you would just get involved in a lot of the forums where people were also studying, like leak code forums, etc. And people were just grinding through like 800, 900 questions, or some people could do it in 100, some people were at 900 and still couldn't get a job. And it was just like, I was just like, there's something missing here. I don't think it's just the memorization, which was what everyone said, but like, what does that mean? What does that translate to? So for me, I developed like a framework leveraging a lot of the existing resources at the time, and just tried to figure out like a better approach as well about like, how do you actually tackle these questions in a systematic way that makes logical sense. And and that course is actually the one I'm the most proud of. I think it's also I've gotten the most responses from it, the most resonant responses from it. A lot of people working at FANG companies will reach out to me and tell me that it was a very pivotal thing for them to kind of like get them in there, or at least motivate them.
That's huge.
So it's the one that I think I'm the most proud of. And then the recent one is system design. This one, working as a lead engineer for probably the last 3-4 years now. From a front end perspective, there's like a lot in the system design portion that you don't really get to touch a lot of as a front end engineer. When I was just working front end, once I became a lead, it became much more part of the workload that I had to also contribute to. And also, like, especially for large systems at scale, dealing with large network volume, large traffic, all of these things, all these tools that are inside that you need in order to build a better system. That was another like really large challenge that I had been on for a long time as well. And I felt like that was another one that was a really interesting angle to take it from. It's another interview course just because it's one of those courses where it's easier to teach from a perspective that is theoretical. Practically speaking, it's difficult to do if you're not actually working a job where you have to do it, right? But even then, if you're at a point where you're contributing to a system in a job, you'll probably be better learning from your peers and your seniors in that sense. So this is more one in a vacuum where people are trying to interview for more senior positions in a lot of companies that typically have a system design interview. And it's just like a holistic approach to like understanding a system. It's not just like, what is these components? How do you put them together? It's more like system thinking about what are you trying to do? Why is everything relevant, right? A lot of these overlap with like what they actually teach you in a formal degree. And I think for me, that was a lot of why I was so drawn to the topics themselves. Just because as I was encountering them, I saw that my gap was missing there. And I tried to fill it as aggressively as possible. And those are the three courses.
That's sick. That's really sick that the way you said that you kind of like, I don't want to say the reason, but you built these courses kind of around some of the things that were really bothering like you, things that not the knowledge that you were missing, and maybe here and then there you had some things that you weren't fully comprehensive on or just understood. So it's cool that like you took that approach, because similarly, like I feel like just in general, people have this, similar problems. There's certain things that are just harder to comprehend. And maybe some people fly by it, but you know what I mean? There are things that are the same for everyone. So it's pretty cool. Now I haven't looked into the systems course that you've done. I haven't opened that one yet, but I'm sure it's great. But one thing that I really did like about the React course, man, is I felt when I started with the Monsters Rolodex, for the people that don't know, the Monsters Rolodex is kind of like the intro project. And I started going through it and I was like, damn, I'm already learning so much. I kind of like, cause I didn't know anything and I was just really going through it. And I was so happy. And then to figure out that there's an entire, like, that was just kind of like a warm up almost in a sense for the e-commerce project that came up next. So that was really cool, man. And I enjoyed building that, because what I did after I finished building the site with you was I kind of used your formulation for building an e-commerce site and try to do it in different lights, like by, for example, I grabbed the Nike site and try to like clone it in a way. And that's what I was doing to really kind of comprehend, because I had a hard time at first. Like I understood everything you were saying, but I wanted to put it into play myself. So I just kept kind of running that same formation, for lack of words, into different projects, and it really helped me out, man. So
that's really actually honestly the best way to learn. The courses are only going to teach you so much, right? In terms of like the theory, the understanding, but a lot of that really solidifies when you're in your brain, like trying to understand the full complexity of what all of these things are, which you can only do by doing. So I'm actually very, very glad to hear that from you, because that is absolutely, honestly, the best way to do it afterwards, right? That's probably the characteristic, I would say, that really shows whether or not somebody will succeed or not in this industry. If I had to boil it down to one thing, I think that is the one thing.
That is really cool to hear. I mean, what I was thinking back then was just like, you know what, because kind of like similar to the fitness industry and similar to MMA, repetition is key. Like when I first learned or when my instructor first showed me what a triangle choke was, I saw it and I kind of learned it, but I didn't know how to do it consistently or how to do it from different positions until I hit that, that repetition. So I saw it the same way with your course, and it really helped me a ton. So I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that you found value out of that.
Yeah, definitely. And so you've created these 3 courses at ZTM, and now we've spoken about some of the differences between them. And one of the things I want to ask you though is what inspires you to like kind of continue doing that, like to continue kind of teaching, or is that, well, maybe first I should ask you, are you looking to make more courses in the future, or is this kind of it for now? And if you are looking to make more courses, kind of what's the inspiration behind how you take creating courses at this point?
So I am someone who only teaches it if I feel very strongly about it.
Mm.
I mean, it's brought me a lot of honestly, like blessings beyond I could ever be so thankful for, right? And I owe it all to Andre, I owe it all to this team, including yourself, right? The ZTM team, as well as the students, every person who takes the courses or even like learns within the space. I think for me though, the one thing is that like I only want to teach if I feel like it makes sense for me to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do something where I'm just teaching and I'm trying to make money out of it, or I'm teaching it because you know, people are asking it for me and they want to hear it from me, right? Like I'm very, very humbled when people tell me that, right? They want me to teach something specific.
Mm-hmm.
But if I feel like I can't add something better to what's already existing, I don't think I would do it, right? Every time I did the courses that I did, I felt like there was something that was missing in the
Yeah.
existing market. I genuinely felt at the time when I did the React course,
Mm-hmm.
everyone was teaching you how to build like to-do apps. Everyone was teaching you how to build just like small pieces of these things in isolation. No one was putting it together in the context of like, this is what you're going to do in a real job. You're going to work
Mm-hmm.
on a commerce website. How are these things going to go together, right? And what order are these things going to matter? What is the problem that you're fixing right now? And what is the solution? And I've always said this is that if you cannot empathize with the problem, you will not understand the solution. And the problems are oftentimes a sequence of this was a problem they had, so they came up with a solution. But the solution came up with new series of problems that they've then solved again. And it's like a history to it and a lineage to it that you have to understand. But
Yeah.
understanding it isn't going to be through just me telling it to you. You're going to have to experience what it's like, which is why the way I teach things, it almost goes all the way back from the start of React till now. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to understand why the React team decided to move in the direction of hooks, you have to understand what was the case for before. We were in a functional component and class component based world. Actually, class components before functional components.
Mm-hmm.
We were doing higher order components, right? And it's like, well, why was that evolution there? What problems were arising from it, right? Like it's very important to me that I guess like in that way, what I'm trying to teach is a framework of thinking about software engineering. So I think like that's the thing. I haven't really come across a topic where I've felt so strongly that I need to teach that type of systemized thinking yet. It might
Mm-hmm.
happen, but I don't really do it unless I feel like that inspiration for it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Otherwise, I think people can tell that I'm not interested when I'm teaching that thing.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit too dry, too methodical, rather than like insightful, which is really where I'm trying to come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there might be something on the horizon. Right now, I'm working on the second half of the system design interview course.
Well, that's great. That's big.
Yeah, but then after that, I think there may or may not be something. It depends on where the industry settles. And like I guess like where my own perspective of these things go. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now with that.
I see you as like a big quality over quantity guy, especially with kind of how you broke down that course. And sometimes, so we have this React crash course up, which is based on your course, as you know, and that shows the pretty much the Rolodex build. And we've had some people kind of ask, "Oh, why aren't we using functional components and all that?" And then I have to explain to them that there's a process, and there's the class that we did the class components and then the functional components, and just that way of you thinking and the way of you breaking that down makes a lot of sense, because you can't. How do you understand a solution if you don't know the problem beforehand? So I definitely do understand that, and I get your perspective on like why. Well, kind of to wrap that whole thing up. I get your perspective on why you want to really make courses only when there's something that you're really passionate, or you really kind of have that knowledge that you mean to share, or there's something that you can provide that others aren't providing at the moment. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's completely fair. So I don't know if you mentioned this before, but so you have the courses here at ZTM. Are you working besides, like, do you have any full-time, are you in a full-time gig, or do you have a part-time, or
Yeah.
do you have, cool.
Yeah. So
What are those?
currently I'm currently working. I just started actually a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, at a new company called Varsity Tutors.
Oh, wow.
It's a tutoring platform. I don't actually tutor in the company. I just build the platform.
I was about to say, you're a man of all trades, a jack of all trades. He's tutoring on the side as well.
No. This one is more like large scale. They're a publicly traded company. I think they're the
Wow.
largest tutoring platform in the US.
Mhm.
They primarily target schools. Like at least the team that I work for is doing it for schools. It's tutor, I guess, like tutor connections, like connecting students to tutors, but like at a large scale, because district school boards are tens of thousands of students at a time, right?
Yeah.
And that's the company that I work at right now. Really great company. Really
Are you
interesting
working as
people. Really
the,
just
yeah, are you working as the, you're working lead front end there? Or is that
yeah,
where?
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Beautiful,
yeah.
beautiful. Actually, and that's a great transition. What is, so you said you recently started with them, and what does a day look like for you? Like, just in general, we don't have to get too super technical, but like, especially at a newer company. How many months ago did you say?
2 months ago. So I should
2 months.
say that there's no front end lead on this team that I'm on. We're all just
Okay.
seniors. There's the
Okay.
hierarchy for our front end team is pretty flat, but everyone that I work with is a senior for sure,
Wow. So
which is honestly a really great working environment in that sense. But day to day at this company, it kind of differs from company to company, but this one, I'll get started. I'll look at kind of like what's moved in terms of the tickets that
mhm.
exist in the project today. Probably check through my messages because it's a fully remote team and there's people all over the world that are working at this company. And then depending on the tasks of what I have from previously I'm still working on, or if I need to pick up a new task, it's just the typical Scrum process, Agile process of grabbing a ticket, or if there's no tickets, most likely there's work that I need to spike out, meaning I need to do some research into it, create a document. This company is very heavily right now in a documentation phase, where we just really try and define the processes and the justifications around the decisions, like much more intentionally around what we're building and why we're building for it.
Makes a lot of
So
sense.
yeah. So from there,
Yeah.
I'll do that, and then maybe pull in designers, pull in product owners, pull in engineering managers, VPs, just to get like a more comprehensive view of what we're working on.
Mhm.
And then from there, they'll give me feedback on the research. And if it's a good to go, then I'll turn that into tickets, which will then incorporate into the sprint in the future or in the current sprint. But from there, I mean, day-to-day development is just day-to-day
Yeah.
development. Try and think about like more holistically from a company standpoint, high level, like what is going to go in that is meaningful. Um, that part is probably the bigger challenge for a lot of these larger companies, these larger
Mhm.
enterprises, just because what does go into the decision making at a large scale is probably the more architecture parts of front end that you don't really see in
Yeah.
coursework. That stuff I think is kind of interesting. Uh, yeah,
I
yeah.
really, you got me curious. I really got to ask you about. So you said kind of everyone on. Is it your team, or everyone, like everyone on your particular team, or everyone's just a senior dev in that, and kind
On my
of
particular
development?
team. On my
Okay.
particular team. In fact, the backend team is much larger. I think the backend team is like 10 people, but there's like 3 lead backends and like everyone else is senior on that backend team. It's because this team that I'm on is a massive, massive opportunity for this company. They've
Mhm.
done astronomical work in the last 2 years. I think like in 2 years from conception, or maybe 2.5, I don't know the full timeline, but it was around COVID, like when it started, that they started to build it. But since launch, I think it's something like 10 or 15% of the total gross revenue of the company. So it's a really, really amazing opportunity to be
Yeah.
working on that I'm very proud to be a part of.
That's really cool though that the people you're working with are extremely. I mean, I'm not saying that incapable people are also just people you should give up on, but
No,
like that they're really capable. Like the people there sound extremely high level, for lack of words. One thing I want to ask you is so with all these new technologies, you know, we don't need. Well, we're probably going to talk about AI a little bit later on, but besides AI, just all the new things coming out, like React Server Components is one that's been in the talks now for it's been in the talks for a couple of years, but with the advances with Next.js and all this new stuff going on is pretty much what I'm trying to say. How do you keep yourself up to date? Like, how do you keep yourself kind of on top of all these things, and how do you know what's something that you should be spending time on learning? And someone at your kind of stature now as a senior dev, what do you know? What should like? How do you know what to focus on, and how do you go about that? Is the question.
So I'm quite lucky in the sense that like a lot of my very close friends are all very senior in very prestigious companies like Stripe, Google, Amazon, right? Wealthsimple, Shopify. Just like I have a very close knit group of friends outside of work that are also in the industry, and you know, lead engineers, senior engineers, staff engineers, and if they start talking about something and how it's solving a problem more specifically, I'll start first understanding the problem, because like just because the thing that they're doing with a new technology might be solving their problem, I might not have this problem, which makes it difficult for me to learn beyond a surface level of what this new technology is. Like React Server Components is a good example. I've read about it, but it's just not applicable in the companies that I'm currently working at, right? Like we're not even on Next.js, like in terms of the solution that we're offering. But federated modules is something that is, and I've been reading about federated modules for like 3-4 years now, right? It's just that now at this company, there's a chance to get involved with it. So for me, a lot of it is that like if somebody's excited about a new technology they're working with, right? In my circles, in my workplace or whatever, I'll do a theoretical look at what it looks like, look at some of the syntax. Maybe I'll spin up like a quick little POC of some kind where I'm just testing it out just to see what are the capabilities of it. What's the API look like? But the actual implementation at scale and understanding like what it means to use this new technology in a production environment, especially one with like high traffic and high usage. Like, you know, for a long time, server components were talked about, but not in production, right?
Yeah.
It was just a concept. So it's like, it's in those cases where I just in terms of where I'm sitting, it's not as relevant to me just because large companies don't want to take risks, right? They don't want to be the first mover in terms of like new technology in case things break. And, you know, if it does, and your, you know, critical business is reliant on it, you have to solve it. And there might not be anyone who solve these problems. You might be the first person encountering it, right? Even if you're working with, you know, the issues, forums of the actual, you know, language or the framework or the library. It still might not be enough. They don't know the full context of your stuff either, right? And
bless that person if someone has to go through that. Sorry to cut you off.
No, exactly. And oftentimes the other thing too is that like these technology, new and shiny as much as they are, may not be something that you need to solve your problem. There may be something that already exists that also solves your problem, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen that time and time again. So I think it's one of those things now where for me, it's like, it's interesting, of course, right? It's fun to talk about it with my peers and, you know, discuss like these new strategies, these new technologies, what are they doing differently? But in terms of like actual application, it really depends. It's a lot more complicated at this stage, I think, in my career.
I feel like from what I'm getting with that response, it's kind of like you don't let the excitement overtake you in a sense. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like you do your reading, and I'm not saying like that, like you, like it kind of at your stage, you look at it like in a much more practical sense. I feel like, which is fair. Over someone that maybe is just starting to code and they're like, oh, this thing looks extremely cool. I've never worked with something like this, React Server Components, and they go and play with the demo or something like that.
And I think at that stage, like when you're new, right, like you should absolutely go where your excitement takes you. The whole point in the beginning is to feel excited, is to feel motivated to learn something new, right? Pick up new technology, whatever it takes to learn something is you want to take whatever source of inspiration you can.
Yeah.
But at most stages, when you're like senior and you're leading teams, there's like way more repercussions around decisions. Right? I can't get excited about technology and implement it. It's not just me that has to maintain it, right? And what happens if I leave that company? Does that knowledge leave with me? Right? It's a lot more political. It's a lot more tactical of a decision that you have to make for the betterment of the company.
Yeah.
And the team that you work with as well. You have to. There's a lot more that goes into that decision making. I think at this point, which is unfortunately a lot more pragmatic, right? Less excited in that sense.
And it sounds like some heavy consequences too, like you said. Definitely things that at that scale are much more important. Related to back to the AI thing, we quickly brushed on it, but with all the AI buzz, all the AI tools coming out, do you find yourself using anything for work or personal life that? Like any AI tools that you play around with or anything like that? GitHub Copilot or something like that?
Absolutely. Copilot's a lifesaver when it comes to boilerplate stuff, right?
I'm
really excited for
Copilot. So much time.
Yeah, I'm excited for Copilot X. I'm still waiting for that. I don't even know if like people are invited into the beta of it yet, but I haven't been. But even if not, like OpenAI is ChatGPT, like GPT-4. I've been paying for it since it came out, right?
Same here, man.
It's phenomenal. Probably the best tool I've ever had for learning that. Like, I would say that like if I wanted to learn something and I was working off the Pareto principle, right? And I was trying to get that 80% initial chunk of knowledge down to, like ChatGPT is what I would use to like structure out like a learning, almost like a guideline, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, I would start filling in the gaps, right? Seeing where, establishing a baseline goes, and then maybe additional resources outside of ChatGPT. But honestly, nothing, in my opinion, has beaten ChatGPT, at least amongst these AI tools yet. I've tried a few for like some stuff I do, like with video editing and things like that, but it doesn't do exactly what I want it to. And the interfaces and such are still pretty new. There is one really good tool for transcription that is AI based. That one is really cool. It's where like it just takes what you say and it turns it into text. I really like that one.
I think
the name of it.
I think Scott sent it to me. You know Scott, right?
Yeah.
I think Scott, but I forgot the name, but I have seen that one. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool tools, and I feel like unfortunately, just with all the AI is all the talk these days. People are just kind of, and I feel like people, just human nature is like to kind of look at the negatives before the positives. In a sense, we kind of look at, oh, this can go wrong, this can go wrong, this can go wrong. Or you can call that maybe just a pessimistic person, and then someone just looks at the bright side. But leads me to my next question. Where do you see this kind of going in the next 3, 5, 10 years? And I hate to ask this because it's so over asked nowadays, but I am curious to hear your response. And that is, should people be worried about kind of the AI advancements and all from your perspective? And kind of what do you think about that in the next 5, 10 years?
So I've asked this question a lot myself as well. And I think like where I'm at with it is that it's somewhere in the middle, right? I think people who are like, you shouldn't be scared, right? They have their reasons for it, right? Like obviously we live in a physical world. AI is not physical yet, right? Unless it decides to somehow inject itself into Boston Dynamics. Like
that's going to be scary. Happen. You see those jumps? I'm sorry to cut you off again, but you see those robots, insane.
The dogs too, right? And you watch that and it's like the way that they test its stability is they keep kicking it over. So I'm like, if it ever learns that like this is animal abuse and AI gets into it, it'll remember that. At least that's what I think so. I have a tangent too, actually. I'm curious if you've ever heard of Rothko's Basilisk before I go back into this. Have you ever heard of Rothko's Basilisk?
No, I don't think so.
It's a thought experiment that was really popular on like a philosophy forum. It gave, I almost don't want to say it because it gave some people like a deep sense of existential dread. But conceptually, it's that in the future, if there's an AI, right? It's a thought experiment again. It's a mental thought exercise. In the future, if there's an AI that does figure out time travel, what it could do is come back and essentially eliminate anybody who does not ensure the guarantee of its creation. So like you have to make sure, essentially, the idea being that if you conceptualize that to be true, then all actions you take must be one that's positive towards this AI from being created. You can't get in the way of it. Otherwise, it will do something to you so that you don't get in the way of it, right? It's like an interest. It's essentially the plot of Terminator, if you think about it.
Yeah, no, that's what it's sounding like. Wow, that just kind of blew up my mind there. Wow, it's honestly, I because I've been a big fan of Boston Dynamics, but I haven't really put the two together. And now, like the Terminator, Boston, and OpenAI, man, it's definitely kind of opens your imagination up a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But to your original topic about like where I see things going, I think I've watched a couple like really interesting people talk about it. Like Diary of a CEO interviewed, I can't remember his name, Mosswat. I'm gonna butcher it, but he led Google X for a while, and he was saying that AI capabilities will far outstrip anything we can comprehend, like in the next year or two, right? And if it's going to be an AI that does do something like Black Swan-esque, that like completely changes everything how we expect it to, it won't be the ones that we hear about. It'll be the ones that are being worked in private, right? That are being funded privately, billions and billions of dollars, less regulations, or less, I guess, attention in that sense, so they can work on it. But beyond that, I mean, whether or not it's optimistic or pessimistic, I think is going to be around the intentions of the people who, maybe trained it, or the companies that are operating with it. I think should people be worried and like, on the cusp? Absolutely. I think people, we don't even need to look that far back. When the internet was created, a lot of people dismissed it, right? And look where it's completely revolutionized the world now. It's really just a matter of like, is it something that is going to happen immediately or not, right? There's other things like crypto, where you could argue that crypto didn't leave the splash that people thought it would. Now, of course, there's still a lot of time to go, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people might have a bit of recency bias there. And, I'm not saying anything bad about crypto as a technology, or even like, a lot of the benefits that it has come. But I think we can see a lot of the negatives that it's brought about as well, right? A lot of
course.
Especially what we see in the news, FTX, all this stuff. I think there people will always find a way to adapt, right? To even as AI comes in, right? Because at the end of the day, AI also has to live with us, or whatever these companies that manufacture also have to live with the common people. I think it's just it's in general just good to be aware, but not be too, I think, severely reactionary one way or the other. I think it's better to just understand, like, historical context wise, like, these things do happen. What can you do to get ahead of it at whatever timelines emerges as the information comes out?
Yeah, no, I really like that view, and that kind of brings into light one of the big points right now, where it's, instead of just absolutely ignoring it in a sense, or just worrying, freaking out about it, you can find different ways to work with it. Like prompt engineering is one. I'm assuming you know all about that. But there's I definitely do think that it is important to kind of keep yourself someone in the loop, even if you're not a tech person, because there are certain things that, like, just that the certain things that are happening, and certain things that I think people should be aware of. But I don't know, my opinion on it. I was speaking to Daniel Burke on it, who big ML guy, machine learning guy, and he thinks that, I mean, there is a worry, and that's something that he went through, and he wrote this whole AI anxiety post. But at the end of the day, it's like you mentioned, the internet was, a lot of people also thought that the internet was gonna just be terrible for the human race. It was going to absolutely affect us in a very negative light. And I feel like that didn't, even though it's sometimes some people will say it had, but it didn't come to fruition, in a sense. Like, I feel like sometimes people just go a little crazy about the uncertainty. And that's kind of what it is with just human nature in general. People just don't like uncertainty. They like to know what's going on. They like to know all of that stuff. And it's a scary thing, though. I totally understand it.
Yeah, I think
where people are coming
especially
from.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it's not even people's fault. Like, I think a lot of the ways that media companies, and just even like social media in general, has figured out that a negative driver is more beneficial in terms of engagement than positive. So it's created also like an increasing psychology where people are, more anxious, more tense in general, right?
Yeah.
Like, and more unknown things, like just in the day-to-day interaction. That's probably also lending itself to it. So I think that's the thing, though, right? Like we collectively also want to be more just like aware of our own internal way of dealing with information as well.
Yeah.
Especially emotional response wise, that will really help in this process. I don't think it's like as sexy of an answer as like, absolutely, be careful. Like, don't be careful, right? Like,
Yeah.
no, AI isn't going to challenge anything, right? I think I kind of think that question is, or those answers kind of miss a chance for something deeper there, like a deeper conversation around like, why are we all asking this question? What does it really mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and you can even tie it into what you just said with, because I mean that's nothing new, but media, the way media portrays different things are for there's
Profit.
certain exactly for that, to keep it simple. It's for profit. So it's a big thing. But enough of the whole AI stuff. We got a whole interview to get through, and I feel like everyone is talking about it nowadays. Let's get on to I want to ask you some of the technical stuff. So not super technical, just some more technical questions. And is it safe? I'm assuming it's safe to say that your favorite library is React. I want to say
favorite is a loaded term.
loaded
I think,
too.
yeah, I would say maybe most familiar.
The one you're okay.
Probably. Yeah, React.
Got it. And why is that? So why is that why is that one of your go-tos? I don't want to say your go-to, but why is React got that place for you?
I think one is that React's dominance is unparalleled, right? In terms of the work environments that I'm in.
Yeah.
The community behind it. Like if I have a problem in React, someone's probably solved it like 1,000 times. You know what I mean? In every flavor of how that problem's probably come up. And that is extremely, extremely beneficial, not only in learning, but also in your professional life, right? Like working through things where people have figured out the problem, broken it down, and then made a fix for it. If you even track that process, you have a deeper understanding all of a sudden of this library, which helps you better understand the nuances and decisions around the company building it. So you have a lot more trust in what they're doing, right? And trust is a huge thing when it comes to these companies that are, billions of dollars are on the line a lot of the times, right? That that kind of responsibility, you have to solve it with a tool that understands and bears that responsibility. Angular is another great one. I haven't worked with it since like version 5, like in 2017. It's been a long time. But I mean, I respect Google and the work they put behind it, and also what problem they're trying to solve and the philosophy behind how they're trying to solve it, right? So I think like from my standpoint, I'm less focused on the developer experience. I know a lot of developers really care about the developer experience of it.
Yeah.
For me, I more care about I think risk management in terms of like people working with it and utilizing it. And that's why for me, like React has always been such a comfortable go-to. It's easy to hire. I know for sure that like if I'm tasked to hire React engineers, I know how to like what I'm testing them for. Yeah. Right. There's a lot there. Whereas like with other things, newer technologies, it's a lot more challenging. It's difficult to say. There's a lot more flavors of how we can approach things. And even if they do things in a different way that is still atypical, the problems that they're solving, I can still understand like how they're approaching it. Right. So it's a lot more easy to understand like your peers and the solutions that people are coming up with and approaching you with. Whereas like with something brand new, if I'm learning at the same time that someone else is, right, like it's more challenging. And that's why I think for me, React is something I really like. It's not to say that it's the best solution. There's obviously some incredible new frameworks coming out, incredible new languages coming out even, that I do like tinker around with and work with. And I really like some of them, but like the practicality of at the size of company that I'm working at right now, it's unfortunate and unrealistic.
Yeah, I think that also just React has even though I might have some people that really like Angular and bashing me in the comment section, React has kind of become like almost like the godfather of the development space at this point. It's so it's like every developer that I've talked to has worked with React. It's that type of library. But that leads me to this next question. If React disappeared tomorrow, what would be something would you get into Angular or go back to play around with Angular? What would you kind of replace that with?
If I was working in an enterprise
Mm-hmm.
and the enterprise was really large, right? There's even places where Angular is better than React.
Yeah.
I think what it is around the philosophy of the tool. React is very close to writing JavaScript, right? Even JSX is just an extension on JavaScript. It just allows you to render HTML and write HTML in a readable environment of JavaScript.
Is Yihua saying that he's going back to vanilla JS? Is that where this is headed?
There are times where I'm tempted.
Oh man.
Just to simplify things, but like Angular is great because if you have 5,000 developers working in different teams all around the world and everyone needs to code things pretty much the exact same way, Angular forces everyone to use largely the same tooling, same patterns, right? It's designed with that in mind. So from a business standpoint, if that was the company I was in, then that's probably what I would go for. If it wasn't React, I do really like Vue, right? Vue is very similar in the sense that it's got a massive community behind it. People love the developer experience, and it's relatively similar to React in terms of how you can think about writing views. So that would probably be my next option. If I was at a smaller company, and I'm assuming because React is gone, Next.js is also gone, Gatsby's gone. Yeah. If I was a smaller company, honestly, it'd be challenging. I'd have to look more into what's currently in the market. I've never been in this position to think about it like that.
It'd be a tough position. Let's hope that day doesn't come. Talking about or back on React with V18, and we spoke about some of the things that were announced with that. How do you feel about this version of React, and kind of where do you see React heading? Doesn't have to be too nitty gritty, but just kind of what your thoughts are on it.
I like the way that I like the way that the team steps back and kind of like conceptualizes and understands the problems that like a lot of the companies are having, right? With what they're encountering, and then figuring out innovative solutions for it, right? I think server components are a great example where the initial people want things faster and faster and faster, right? And for a front-end developer, performance is probably like the biggest thing that you're gonna encounter from a bottleneck standpoint, where it's like there's certain things that you just that are going to be bottlenecks for your performance, right? And one of those is the initial render. You render the page, you download the bundle with all the code in it, that loads, and then from there, after all that rendering and fetching happens, you have to then fetch initial data, right? From that initial data, you make another fetch for another part of your application that you're trying to render right now. And then from that, you might keep going, right? There's like a cascading waterfall of API requests that you have to do. And that is a large chunk of what we need to get down if we're talking about like first time to paint, right? But with server components, it's essentially doing all on the server before you even make the request. So you make one request, it gives you everything you need in the initial bundle. You can't avoid that. But like all the data is already there. You can skip that step. So like from an approach standpoint of how they're trying to really solve a problem that people are like complaining about that you can't solve as a front-end developer. That's something that React can solve unless you build the server yourself, right? Unless you go about building yourself server rendered components, or at least you do SSR to some degree, right? But that comes with different issues. Like that would be like, that is the approach. So I like that about the React team. They consistently do that. They're consistently taking this approach and looking at the meta, because it's really hard to make these decisions. No matter what you do, people are going to complain. Hooks was one that I was not about when it first launched, right? I was firmly in the functional programming camp. If you remember when you took my course the first time, I was really about higher order components, functional programming, right? And like hooks, like use effect is a side effect. So I was like, this is wild. Why are we doing this?
And comprehending hooks at the beginning for someone that's learning is tough, man. It's very difficult. I think some people overlook that. And I remember you spoke about it a lot in your course, that hooks is something that takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, a lot of repetition.
Yeah. And it's very
because
different.
yeah, it just changes. So it's very different.
Hooks was why I rebuilt the course, because I was like, I can't just say that like you're mapping class methods into these ways that you write hooks. It's like it's a completely different model. And I always told people to read Overreacted, especially at that time, which was Dan Abramov's blog. And Dan Abramov leads the React team, right? He was the creator of Redux, the Redux library, and then he joined the React team. And his blog is phenomenal. He has like 40-minute reads on just use effect and all the nuances and complexities and why they designed it the way they did. And like when it first launched, like for me reading through that, I understood, I had a better understanding of what they were trying to do. Because I think if you were just trying to make effects, like even now, some people I meet still do that, right? You try and make these hooks map to something that like existed previously, you're missing like 50% of the picture. It's a completely different paradigm. It's a different mental model of how to build components and like just how data flows through these components, right?
Yeah.
It's very different. And I think that's like it's a challenge. It's very challenging because if you're coming in and you're right, if you're doing it right, like even understanding what is a side effect, right? Like when you're learning like JavaScript for the first time, you're just it's too much. Functional programming is notoriously extremely challenging and almost like almost elitist in a weird way. But there's there's a reason for it, right? Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go back outside of the React space now. And one thing I want to ask you is, because I've had this question asked a lot on YouTube. I've seen it sometimes through the Discord channel. And you've had so much experience in the industry. I want to ask you this: we spoke how important algorithms and data structures are for securing a job. It's especially for a FANG company. If you're trying to get into FANG, that's something that anybody that's trying to do that needs to prep extremely extensively, as you know. But how much does that come to play in real life day to day? Is that like that's something that I want to I've been curious about asking you that, especially in like the actual workspace, you know what I mean? Outside of because I would imagine that at a high level, or when you're leading or trying to find solutions for complex and very large problems, that's where I'll see that coming in more. But I wanted to see what you kind of what you go through and what you've seen.
So for backend or full stack roles, it's much more common just because they will start storing their data in graphs, in binary trees, in red black trees, like that. You'll see it right in companies that are very data intensive, because they do need to sift through it extremely quickly. So once they're using those tools, you need to understand the algorithms around them. You may not have to implement them like the same way that you would in the interviews, or break it down to the same degree under the same kind of pressure, but they are looking for you to at least know what that means, right? You don't have to whip out, God, Dijkstra's, right? Like on the fly, but like you need to know that like, oh, there is an existing algorithm that gets me as quickly between 2 points as possible, right? Like, like those will be valuable. But like these are only companies that are very, very large or have very specific data needs, like in terms of that. If it wasn't for that, like as a front-end engineer, you almost never see it. It almost happens.
Yeah, that was more so my question. Because in the back end, it definitely makes sense, especially back end or full stack. But as a front end developer, someone that's working on a UI,
never.
That's okay. Cool.
There may be one or two. I don't want to say never. There are one or two instances where like I've had to come up with like because of so it's very important to say that like data structures and algorithm teaches you algorithmic thinking. It's a very, very specific way of breaking down a problem where you're trying to identify like a series of very optimal decision making and then like coordinating them all together to come up with something that's like remarkably elegant. Actually, algorithms are, once you understand how like an algorithm comes up with or how it works, you cannot help but be in awe of the person who came up with it, because all of those conditions that they thought of it, it's incredibly creative, right? And it's remarkably interesting how they come up with it. And I think like I don't know if when you took my course, did you watch me break down the rabbit and hare algorithm?
I think so. I took it 2 years ago now.
Yeah, it was an optional video, but it was one that I was the most proud of in that entire course. That it was that one, because I think like that's the only time where I really explain like mathematically and logically, if you walk through how that algorithm is composed, why it is optimal and why it works, right? It's like one of the few times where you can look at it and work backwards enough to understand some of the like algebraic computer science behind how this algorithm is created. And it gives you like a deep respect for it. I think like one of the things about it was that, and this is like a little bit off tangent, but like one of the things for me of why data structured algorithms is worth learning, even if you don't use it in your day-to-day, one is that it teaches you this frame of thinking. So you can come up with very elegant solutions for very niche, but like problems that do exist when you're working with larger data sets on the front end or things where you need performance to some degree. But additionally, it teaches you, I want to say, the deeper meaning behind this career, right? Like as a computer scientist, it really inspired me to understand like, wow, like especially once you start looking into like P versus NP, like which is the millennium problem, right? Like just like NP hard, NP complete, like the concept behind it. You have computer scientists existing today and also in the past who dedicated their lives to try and solve one particular problem, right? That will change humanity if it gets unlocked, right? Which is how innovations happen to the degree that they do at the speed that they do today. And a lot of the times they dedicate their lives to solving a piece of it on a hunch. They're like, this is my hunch of what I think this problem can be broken down into these 5 steps. I've solved step 3. I've solved step 1. They're in polynomial time. These are optimal times. The rest, though, egregious time and space complexity, right? But what I'm laying down is that somebody in the future can come and maybe optimize this, right? They won't even see the fruits of their labor. They'll be long dead.
Yeah.
A lot of them are, but like that type of nobility in this craft is one of the things that I got out of it, that I was like, wow, this, it gives you a newfound respect for this career path, right? Because we come in and it's easy to think about the money and like the products and like building, engineering,
the perks, all the stuff. Yeah.
But this, I mean, it's revolutionized the world for a reason. It's on the backs of some of these people who, like, at the core of these things are these algorithms and these data structures, right? That people have to come up with.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the most valuable piece of it is if you can tap into that part of the inspiration, like, and that's what happened for me, right? That made me just have a deeper reverence for what it is, because it's hard, right? When you're studying for the interviews, you're so tense, so nervous, so anxious, right? That like you hate the process. But like I think changing the mindset, that was the switch that flipped for me, that stopped me from seeing it as an interview and more seeing it as like, oh, this is me paying my dues for this incredible life-changing industry.
Yeah, no, that's super sick. I have to be honest with you. I was studying I took the course, and then I was doing a lot of leak code and studying. And I was in an interview process actually with Google. But I went in, then I got the offer from ZTM because I was also talking to ZTM. And before, just so you have a quick background on kind of my history, my first love was anything related to cameras, photography, filmmaking, anything in the creative side. I love making that old vintage retro 8 look and just these different types of like film. So that's what I did before even studying. I was just a freelance photographer. I worked at a couple surf camps and did all that stuff. And then I started coding because I wanted something, like I wanted an actual career in my life. And I'm not saying you can't make a career out of filmmaking or anything like that, but I wanted something that, I can make a certain amount of money. Like once I learn this stuff, I get hired, I know I'm making a certain amount of money, and it's not as risk taking, I guess.
Yeah.
And then I started doing that. But fortunately, I kind of found with ZTM a creative and a techie side that I could find a balance of the two, which brings me to kind of what I'm saying, which is that's why I took this role.
Bro, people might not know you run our entire like everything media, and it's dope, man. The growth that we have on those platforms is absurd.
Man, I appreciate that.
Thanks to you. And it's great stuff. It's genuinely great stuff.
Man, I appreciate that. By the way, actually, a quick plug in. If anybody hasn't followed us on Threads, we just opened up a Threads account. Super cool post going up there. So definitely check that out. But I appreciate that, Yihua, man. It's definitely something I really enjoy doing, which is why it just didn't. Well, actually, I think if I'm being honest with myself, I think I had a phone screening with Google. I had a second interview, and I don't think I heard back after that. So it's tough, man. It's tough to get into those companies, and but I think that was already after I've committed to ZTM. So I'm happy that that didn't work out.
Yeah,
But
we all are too.
but the reason I mention all of this is because one thing that I do or that I really did grab from your course, and one thing that I think you're big on is it's not about doing 100 easy leak codes, 100 medium, 100 hard, or doing 500 leak codes, or doing all the damn questions possible. But I think what I learned most from that course was the mindset of thinking, like the framework of how you process each of these types of problems, because they all have, or certain problems have similarities. And that's the thing that you really pushed, like the mindset thing on me, which kind of made me go back and not just look at it as like, oh, I got to memorize how the hell this binary tree works or all of this. And you know what I mean? Like just memorization game beforehand. Instead, now I'm looking at a more high level view. So that's one of the complete long and large tangent, but that's one of the things I really loved from your course was that mindset shift.
Yeah, I think, and I really discovered it. I think like the thing too is that like I get a lot of people like, you know, people might not have the time, right? Like taking time out. It's actually known that a lot of people have to quit their jobs to study full time for 3 to 6 months, even if you're professionally working as a senior engineer.
Yeah.
If you've never done it before, if you're learning it all for the first time, or if like, you know, in university, you don't remember or recount a lot of it, you have to do that. And it's asking a lot of people for a lot, but these companies can do it, right? They're paying you so much, like $500,000 or upwards sometimes, right? But like one of those things that like I did that was extremely, like it kind of taught me this framework, this mindset thing that I was trying to teach. I remember having a whiteboard and I remember sitting in front of the N Queens problem. It's a famous dynamic programming problem. And I had like learned some of the basics of dynamic programming and I'd done some of the problems, right? N Queens was a caliber of problem I'd never done before. And I remember just sitting there with the whiteboard, 14 hours a day for 3-4 days straight, just trying to break it down. Like logically, how would I solve this? How would I solve this problem, right? And through it, I remember by the end of the 4th day, right? I had sunk like 60 hours into this thing already. I had finally hit the solution. And I remember in that moment, like it all unlocked for me. All these 4 steps of dynamic programming, I forced my way through it, right? And it was so stressful, so anxiety inducing, so like almost, I don't want to say humiliating, but like it was just like you're constantly sitting with this inadequate feeling of like I have no idea what's going on, right? But like you have all these hunches and you go off them, but like that problem solving process where you're looking at every step, right? It's like it's like crossing a river. You jump on one rock and then you're looking and sometimes you go down like, you know, paths and they're wrong and you have to come back, but like it's through that process that you develop in your own brain a system of fundamentally understanding what matters and what doesn't, and you build the depth of why it is that way, because you cannot explain that to someone that you have to. That's why I say the course is like maybe it doesn't even get you to the 80%. Really, it gives you the first like 50%. The next 50% is all up to you. You have to do the problems, but like you don't just grind them, you don't just memorize them, but you need to develop like those neural pathways in your brain to understand like deeply why this hunch might be incorrect, or like this way of tackling this problem might be correct or incorrect, right? It's like it's akin to Ju-Jitsu, right? It's like I that's what actually one of the things that drew me to Ju-Jitsu was that like it's a very tactical sport, right? And it's because you don't know in this position what you can and can't try. You don't know this guy's experience and technique, but like your body remembers. It's very similar. The brain is the same when it comes to these types of things. And I think that's one of those things that like, I'm very glad that, you know, I'm getting to talk to you about this, because like, it's one of those things where like I've felt very strongly about, but I just never really get the chance to really talk about it in some ways, right? This is kind of like some of the thoughts around like how I made this course, like some of the things I really kind of tried to.
Well, you could tell. You could tell. In my opinion, I think that was like the most clear thing with that course was it like I mentioned earlier. It's not just about grinding through the problems, but you have to fundamentally understand why this is the approach, or why this is not the right way to do something, or why this can be the optimization for that, or you know what I'm saying. So it's definitely that's what I think most people are taking from that course. But yeah, man, it's like it's definitely like jiu-jitsu, man. You have to give it a shot. You have to go try it out, because
I know this is one of those moments where it might change the course of my life.
Next time I see you, you're gonna have a purple belt.
Oh my god.
Probably gonna be oh man, that's funny. All right, man. Well, this next segment of questions that I want to ask you are some impactful questions. Although I like talking about data structures and algorithms, I don't like talking about it all day. So definitely some impactful questions. And one thing I want to ask you is, what are some of the biggest changes, maybe positive, maybe negative, that you have seen from the industry since you've started? And a second part to that is, what do you see, or what changes do you see happening in the near future? Like in the next 5 years, are there certain things that concern you with the ways that things are going in the present right now, and that may affect the future? No, that's a tough question.
Yeah, but you know what? Like outside of the AI conversation, right? I think AI is just one thing. AI to me is, from some ways, tactically similar to crypto. Was just like it's the interest, right? I think for me, one of the biggest things, and this might be a much larger problem than just in software industry, but this fixation on hyper growth and hyper capitalism is probably one of the largest problems in the industry. It's also one of the things that provide the greatest blessings to people working in this industry, right? But there's a lot of issues that we're seeing, and it's impacted a lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues, right? Who we saw the massive layoffs, 20-30% from all these major companies that should have been ironclad, right? Like, untouchable top Fortune 10 companies that were all going through it. And it was hyper growth. And I don't think it's necessarily the company's problem. It's like the investors, right? A lot of investors, you don't really get to think about the long term. A lot of times they look at an opportunity and they make their bets, and they say that, you need to satisfy quarterly and annual goals, milestones, which translates into aggressive hiring, aggressive projects, right? But I think what gets lost in it is that there's people that are being impacted at the end of the day, whether it's the technology that's being built, whether it's the people that are working in them, right? People are unfortunately getting impacted negatively by this, just this obsession with increasing stakeholder stock value, right? Or stakeholder benefits. It's the same reason though why engineers are paid so much, product people are paid so much, everyone in this industry gets paid so much, right? It's all the great benefits of being able to work remotely, these sometimes interesting 35-hour work week setups, right? I can't say that you can get one without the other, but it's one of those things that I think is a concern I'm having, right?
And that's through a lot of industries as well, like you mentioned. That's a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also it's a fundamental woven part of how our society works, right?
Yeah.
But I think I do think that it is leading to a greater issues in some ways. That's probably more what my concerns are, especially when it comes to the day-to-day of people working in a startup environment, right? Is that a lot of times you're not thinking about business fundamentals. You're not thinking about profitability at all. You're working off of investments, right? You raise rounds, you get war chests that you then use to disrupt the industry, and you keep doing it until you run out of money and you can't get any more money, right? And the problem with that is that even from a business practice standpoint, this is of course one model, right? but like your business at the end of the day isn't profitable, right? You can't operate without investor capital, which means that the decisions you make are not ones that you make by yourself, right? And some people would argue that this is always the case. No matter what, there's somebody that you have to, be accountable to. But like, I mean, it's a model though. You see so many startups and so many people working in these startups. They a lot of times they pay the price in some ways, right? It leads to very frustrating, toxic work environments in a lot of ways too. I think it's just one of those things that we just don't really, or it's talking about. Don't get me wrong, people talk about it, but I think this is one of the challenges that I would hope that we do better. Collectively.
I like that. I like that answer a lot. One of the next question I want to ask you is similar in a way, and it's looking back at kind of the beginning of your career and into where you're at now. What is one of those hard truths that you had to come to with the software engineering industry? I know there may be many, but what's one that you can think of where it's just like kind of like a cold bucket of water on your face, almost like it was like not what you expected, or maybe something along those lines?
I think that there exists a unicorn developer, a unicorn engineer, like the Steve Wozniaks is the best example. These people who are like born, they know code better than they know anything else, right?
Yeah.
These people exist in almost every company you're going to work at. There is this brilliant genius developer, and if you know very quickly whether or not you are or are not this person, even I would say before you start learning software engineering, you probably know.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like a lot of us aspire to think that one day we'll be close to being that good. But the problem is you don't even know the distance. It's so massive that it's you don't even like, you're like, oh, maybe if I was 10% as good, right? That might even still be out of reach, right? The gap is so massive. And I've met engineers who are so incredibly brilliant at software engineering that like it's profound. Knowing them humbles you, like just knowing that they exist. And even like it teaches you a lot about yourself, right? And your own ego in some ways. That was probably like a really interesting and hard truth that I had to like kind of like just understand really early on in my career. But that doesn't mean, like, of course, right, that you don't have skills or value that they don't have, right? A lot of times they are hyper focused on solving very technical challenges. Occasionally you'll meet people like Mark Zuckerberg who are good at everything. Like they're extremely engineering, like brilliant. They're also business savvy as anyone can be, right? Like it's possible. These people also exist, right? But I think a lot of it is just that, like, once you understand that and you accept that about your life, then I think you can then figure out where is your place in all this, right? How do you live the best version of your life that you can?
I'm assuming that takes weight off your shoulders as well, man. Having that pressure of you trying to, like, I guess not compete in a way, but you trying to reach this. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have ambitions or trying to always progress in life, but I feel like it does remove that weight if you're like, you know what, this person is just the way this person thinks, and the way this person just is able to solve a problem is different. It's not common.
Exactly. I think it's just that, like, the path to engineering excellence is not one road, right? It's very diverse. A lot of times I think that some ways I've charted my own path in this career, right? That is very different, right? I'm very grateful for a lot of my background in like philosophy, political science, and training that brought me these opportunities at Zero to Mastery, or even like some of these leadership positions that I have.
Of course,
this framework, it's I think it's just like that's the cold hard truth. It's for me, and I think if you can learn it early, is that like there's many ways to skin the engineering cat, and it's not just engineering excellence. It's a part of it. You should absolutely strive to be the best engineer you can, but like there's more to it than trying to be Steve Wozniak.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. One of the things I wanted to ask you is similar. Yeah. It's especially with, people trying to really go hard and trying to push themselves to the limit and really try to become, I guess, as technical as possible. You go through burnout, and a lot of people suffer, go through that burnout. I don't know if you've ever gone through it where you're just like, I don't even want to do this. Like, I remember when I was studying data structures and algorithms, man, there was a couple of times where I was like, you know what, F this. I'm fucking done. And I just go on a walk, man, and I'd be extremely like upset, pissed, and all that. So if you've gone through that, how have you dealt with it, and what do you recommend to people? You know what I mean? Because it's a normal thing. People go through it in anything in life. So
honestly, I've gone through it probably twice, and one time was the interviews. My story is that like I'm Canadian. I don't have I don't have an engineering degree. I always dreamed of working at FANG, and I always and my relationship was also in the US, right? My partner got a visa. I was trying to get one, and the way I wanted to do it was that I was in San Francisco, so I wanted a FANG job, right?
Yeah.
Two birds, one stone. And what I realized, so I did this year and a half of prep, right, for it, and I got job offers, top firms, right, FANG companies, but I could not get the visa. It was at a time where this was like COVID, right? So this was when the borders were extremely strict. If you don't have an engineering degree, you're never getting a visa, right? But they don't find out until you've gone through this process. So I remember the anxiety of sleeping maybe 1 hour a night for like weeks on end, right? Just like you're already also socially isolated, right, from COVID and everything. I was just like absolutely burned out. I was so burnt out that like I had to take a sabbatical. Like because again, you work yourself up, you get the offers. You're like, you think that everything's done with, and then you get rejected by, you know, these massive law firms are trying to help you. But then the board is just like, listen, it's never going to happen. Right. And at that point, the kind of things that you have to walk away from, the life you have to walk away from, the dreams you have to walk away from, right? Even my relationship ended because of it. It was just like, we couldn't do it. And it was a 7-year relationship at the time.
Tough.
Right? It couldn't work. I was completely burnt out, right? It was so much so that I completely took a mental health, like, and thank God for ZTM. Honestly, ZTM gave me like, and that's the great thing about Andre. Andre's extremely understanding, right? Whatever you're going through, he's like, hey, you work on you first. That's more important than anything. And of course, you know, the benefit of ZTM, working remotely, even these courses, right? Passive income, all this stuff. I had a plan where I was just going to walk the earth for, you know, a couple years originally, right? I didn't know what I was going to do. I was just like, I need to disconnect. I need to like refine myself, right? I totally relate to this burnout thing. And I think like that was one of the things that really changed my outlook on it. And it was very hard, right? Like I went to Bali, right? I went to Australia. I went all over Southeast Asia. I was just like trying to figure out like, you know, what matters to me? Who am I? Fundamentally, who am I? When that is your goal for so long and it defines who you are, right? It uncovers and unearths a lot of questions internally, right? About, like, why am I doing this? What is this for, right? And those are the questions that I went out to answer. I think like the advice I would give is that like take deep mind of your mental well-being and prioritize it. Especially in this industry, you have the means. This industry pays well. You have the means, right? Make it a priority. Really, really make it a priority, and like spend the time to leverage the benefits and the privilege that comes with this type of income to really better understand yourself, right? Better understand your community, the people that matter to you. Because those are the things that really like I came back with, is that like my community is the most important thing. It's not the job, it's not the money, it's the people that I live with every day. It's my close friends, it's my colleagues, right? How do I make their lives better? How do I enrich their lives? How are they going to enrich mine? And I think that was it's those types of conclusions that you can only come to if you spend the time that burnout gives you, right? That demands from you. Burnout's like, you need to work on something else, right? Like you have to focus on me now because you've neglected me for so long. I think that would be the soundest advice I would give that I realized from going through it.
That's a really good way to put it. I feel like the mind almost says, no, I really don't care at this point. You're going to do what I say, as in like, you're going to feel it, or you're going to figure out a way to get this, like, to be in a better situation, to get yourself mentally out of that feeling. Which is so important. And I think a lot of people definitely don't prioritize it as much, me included. I was, in different phases in my life, not just tech, but there's certain things that like in Ju-Jitsu, I was competing for a very long time, did like a lot of Ju-Jitsu tournaments. And
oh, damn.
Yeah, man. And some things just didn't happen for me. And it is really, really like it put me in a bad place because I was going to the gym routinely working. And outside of the gym, I was I actually decided to start yoga for Ju-Jitsu. I never wanted to do yoga, and I was like, for Ju-Jitsu, I'm gonna do yoga. Started hitting the sauna, started going on runs, and when you don't get the performance that you expect, it's extremely frustrating. So in different avenues in your life, I feel like you definitely have to sometimes just step back, man. And it's cool that you went to those places, by the way. I know you mentioned that Australia, Bali. Would you say Bali?
Bali, yeah.
Sick.
Yeah. Singapore. I just touring Southeast Asia, right?
I have to go there. I'm a big fan of Central and South America, so that's where I've been traveling for the most part.
Oh, wow. Okay, I've been to a few. I've been to like Colombia and like Nicaragua, but I haven't been to, I guess.
You have to go to Costa Rica, man. My parents are from Costa Rica.
I have been to Costa Rica.
Oh, okay.
I want to go. I want to go now as like an adult.
It's a fun time. But Colombia is also extremely, as you probably know. I really enjoy Colombia. Really cool place.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's dope. Definitely got to see more of it. I'm gonna gotta ask you for
shoot me a message, man. This is the last question for the impactful section, at least, and it's one that is definitely I can relate to, and it's something that I'm very interested in hearing. Because I know I was watching the interview that you did, or the podcast that you did with Chris Sean. And you talked about working at this, or I don't know if you were volunteering or working. I don't remember exactly, but it was at this company named Bridge, I believe, where it was a big thing was minorities in tech. And I kind of want to hear your opinion on where we stand right now for minorities in tech. Whether do you see it since that point? Have you seen a lot of progression? And you being on the inside, where do you see that minority stand? You know what I mean? What is that to you?
Yeah. I think that for me, there is some very interesting, like there are so tech is always been much more friendly, I would say, in some ways, because it's a meritocracy, right? As a meritocracy, people, especially companies, right? They do prioritize whether or not you can do the job, right?
Most important thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you look at the executive boards in like FAANG companies, they're some of the most diverse, right? Maybe diverse in one direction, right? But still extremely diverse. And diversity and inclusion is challenging because, we could always do better. It's one of those things, right? But I think a lot of it is about, and what drew me to Bridge specifically. Bridge was a program that was free for women, and we were volunteering everyone in Bridge. And it would be a cohort where it would be a coding boot camp that would operate in a company. The company would essentially sponsor the boot camp. The company would then provide engineers, senior engineers, that would teach the content. And the cohort was specifically for women and women of color, right? Or people who identify as women. And that cohort was free for them. They would go through the cohort, learn from these engineers, and at the same time, the engineers and the company would have first shot at essentially pulling them into the company as juniors. Very interesting concept, very, very successful. Yeah. And I think like what it showed me was just that like a lot of it is not about natural talent when it comes to like socioeconomic or racial background, right? A lot of it, even myself, I don't come from a computer science background. It's not about whether or not you think you're a math person. I have a philosophy degree. I thought I was a philosophy person, right? I thought I was like a lit major. But a lot of it is about opportunity. A lot of it is about the environment, right? You need to be able to have a place where you can cultivate, and you need to be able to create spaces where you can cultivate talent, right? I think that this industry does a really great job. We could all do better, but again, it does a great job. I think we're only going to go more because the world is globalizing more and more. More superpowers are cropping up as well, right? It's unavoidable in some ways. I think that in that sense, diversity and inclusion is not something that you should drag as an anchor as a company. If anything, it's going to be your superpower at this point. It's how you get ahead of the curve from this. I think so. It's been that way for quite a while now. Some companies really get it, right? I think Google understands this like immensely.
Google, Facebook, I think, is like Google is like the front runner for me. From what I feel like every time I see something from Google, it's just about any type of person on there.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you know what I mean? And you know, it shows, right? Those are benefits.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is in, like, you know, in this process of doing it, right? Like, can you keep your own voice as well, though, right? As a company. But I think it's just it's a very interesting time to be, very impressive time to be. I mean, I think I've never seen so many vocal, outstanding
Yeah.
engineers who identify as like LGBTQ, in fact, right?
Yeah.
Some of the best engineers I've met are in that camp. It's just
I think,
one of those.
yeah, I do agree. I think that sometimes the problem is, and this is coming from, I'm Latino hit, so we're definitely a minority. And what I will say is, I think sometimes people don't realize how it, because what I want to say is that people don't realize that sometimes the company, or most of the times, the company is looking, actually all the time, the company is looking for the best possible developer. And just because, you know, someone's this color or something like that doesn't just guarantee you a spot, which is tough, because I'm Latino, and I also feel like if there's a majority of if, for example, if there's someone smarter than me that may be in the majority, I think that they should have that. If someone that's better for that, better qualified for that job, they should have the opportunity to work at that company over me. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's a tough situation, because you definitely want inclusion, and you definitely want to bring as much diversity as possible. But I try to look at it high level, and you also, as a company, you want the best possible developer on that team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And sometimes they align, which is the best possible situation. And nowadays, it looks like it's happening more and more, which is amazing. Sometimes they don't. So it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just the way I see it, but I do think that it's such a fine line with that.
I absolutely agree. I do think that best is subjective in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting you mentioned Latin. Some of the best developers I've met, some of the most senior, most aware, business savvy, right? Like incredible, all-rounded. Like, you want to talk about unicorn engineers, all Brazilian. I've met, like, I got like 10 that I've all worked with. I have such a high opinion of Brazilian engineers, like just like stellar people, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly kind, empathetic, brilliant developers,
Mm,
hardworking, right? It's some of my closest friends are Brazilian developers, and it's one of those things that, like, you know, it's just you just, again, you wouldn't know, right, unless you tried. I do agree with you, though, that, like, you know, engineering to a lot of degree is a meritocracy. But you got to work on teams, and there got to be people too, right? Like,
mhm.
you know, you can have one, you know, there's a very common term of an asshole developer, right? An asshole, a brilliant asshole. You know, he'll make leaps and bounds for you technologically, especially competitively. And if you build a process around him, you can make it work, or her, right? Not to say a gender in any one direction, but you know, people don't want to work with those people. And that
Yeah.
also lowers team morale, right? You pay for that eventually in some ways. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying, right?
The,
We shouldn't hire for diversity's sake in that
mhm.
sense.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's just, there's so many things that go into it. It's definitely a tough, like I don't want to say tough conversation, but it's like a tough, like when you really think about everything that goes into it, it's tough. Um, but outside of the impactful questions, I want to get into some fun questions, man. We talked
Mm,
about all the technical stuff. We talked about your background. We talked about all that stuff. So this next section is well, these next couple sections are pretty quick sections, but the first we're going to start off with would you rather questions
mm,
related around software development and stuff like that. So I have them on my right side. I have another screen here, so I'm going to be looking over here just so I can read these off to you. And as quickly as possible, just tell me kind of which one and why. Would you rather work on a project with an impossibly tight deadline, or on a project where the requirements keep changing every week?
huh.
I'm telling you,
Um,
these are gonna be fun, man. So
yeah.
it's
Huh. I guess with the impossibly tight deadline, are we cutting requirements in order to bring down the scope of work? Would be one
I
thing.
I guess that's only fair, because
Yeah, I mean that's the only way,
Yeah,
right?
that's the only way it could happen.
So the question is really, am I comfortable? Would I rather cut down like scope to meet the a really crazy deadline, or I guess like with requirements changing? Requirements changing really depends. That one
That
depends on
scope
who's.
is
Yeah,
it a scope creep or what are we talking?
yeah. If it's scope creep, if it's like sometimes you work for people who just say yes to every stakeholder requirement, right? And there's no
Yes,
process
yes, yes.
management. I hate that. That's just that drives me insane. It's agency work in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
And it drives you nuts. Like honestly, I'd take the deadline. Like the requirements changing, I have to know why. Is it the market's shifting? But if it's shifting every week, then there's another problem in the
Now
process.
here's the thing. Here's the thing. Let's say you don't know the why for the
You don't know the why.
requirements change. You don't know the why.
So it's a vacuum.
It's a vacuum, pretty much. Are we sticking with the
I
requirements?
would take the deadline. I would
The
take
deadline?
the deadline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
It's really hard to make all this work, and then it's like one day you're building a house, the next day they're like, listen, actually we're building a car, right? It's like I've already laid the foundation.
It's almost impossible in that sense.
Yeah, exactly, right? It depends on also the scale of these like what are these requirement changes.
Let's go with number 2 here. This is a fun one. I like this one. Would you rather always write your code on paper first or have to dictate your code to someone else to type for you?
Like line by line, or can I tell them like the idea of like what I want them to write and then they write it?
No, this is a line by line situation. Yeah.
Oh man, I would write it. I had to learn. It's probably one of the most common concerns and complaints I have about my fan course is that my handwriting's terrible, right? But everyone, again, at the time when I made the course, right, everyone was known for the whiteboard interview. I was like, well, if you're gonna whiteboard, you're gonna have to do it, right? And through it, having done it, like myself practiced, I mentioned the whiteboard when I did the N Queens problem, right? Like for the first time, I ended up actually really loving the process of writing code, even if it's illegible, like, which is the biggest complaint, I guess. It makes you think about it in a different way.
Yeah. So that one was a lot easier of an answer on that. Okay, so let me see if I have a more challenging one for you. I want to get you stuck, man. Would you rather? Let me see this one. Would you rather code using any would you rather code without using any libraries or frameworks, or code without using any internet resources, including Stack Overflow or documentation, anything like that?
Oh, I would code in vanilla. No questions.
Yeah, we talked about vanilla. Yeah, you need that documentation, man. Something new coming out.
I can't remember everything either, right? Like it's absurd to expect somebody to memorize like every nuance of every, even the base APIs, right? Like that's where some of the most interesting bugs that like, people have war stories, like bug stories that like they'll encounter that have to do with the most obscure defaults that come with like, the base API of even JavaScript, right? Like the node engine or something. It's absolutely, Doc. Give me the internet access.
Yeah, I like that. I'm curious to see your opinion on this one. Would you rather permanently have a slow internet connection at work or use a very old PC/laptop for coding? So slow internet or very old system?
Oh, that is hard. I'd probably take the old PC.
Yeah, the slow internet is terrible, man.
Yeah. That's like, honestly, that's like having a Ferrari with like, I don't know, a 1960s Toyota engine. Like it's
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The new computer is still gonna freak out just as much because the internet would suck.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Okay. Would you rather have to code in a language you dislike or always have to work with a team member who doesn't pull their weight?
Probably code in a language I don't like. Like I've done that enough times that like I don't mind it, but like actually no, you know what? I could work with somebody not pulling their own weight as long as they don't get in the way of the rest of the team doing the work. There's a difference between like somebody who's maybe lazy versus somebody who's like destructive, right?
Yeah. It affects more than just him or her.
Lazy I could deal with, right? Lazy I could deal with. Honestly, both I could deal with, but I'd probably take the lazy.
All right, the last question in this section: would you rather have your car driven by AI that drives like a cautious grandmother? This is a fun one, or one that drives like an F1 driver?
I have an aversion to adrenaline, so I'll take the granny driver. I'm a granny driver, so
You flew through those, man. This next section is going to be true or false. This is some technical questions in there. We'll see. First one, true or false? Most software engineering positions require a computer science degree.
No, false.
Got it. Yeah, agreed. True or false? Contributions to open source projects can make a software engineer's resume stand out to hiring managers.
True. I would say that's true. It's rarely done. As much as we say to do it, it's still not common.
Yeah, people and it's not just CTM, but I've seen a lot of different places preach open source, but it's I don't think many devs are doing it.
No, it's too intimidating. It's too scary. Yeah. It's a court of your peers.
I mean, when I first contributed to my first one, I was literally scared I was gonna break the before doing it. My mindset was I'm gonna mess something up. It's gonna be bad, and that's what most people probably think about.
100%. And because it's free, people are not under the same onus in a company of like professionalism where it's like, it's okay, don't worry. Yeah. Like you could get chewed out by the person maintaining it. They'll call you names, be like, never work again,
Next question. All right. True or false? All software engineers need to be experts in algorithms and data structures. We spoke about this earlier.
Yeah. False, but you don't need to be an expert by far.
Yeah, definitely.
But definitely dabble. You don't need to dabble, but you should dabble.
True or false? Software engineers spend more time reading and understanding code than writing it.
Good ones do.
Good. All right. We got two more. True or false? All software engineers can hack into any system just like in the movies.
Absolutely false. Nowhere close. I don't even know how to start, to be honest.
I think that is 100% the biggest misconception in the industry for people that aren't in the industry or not planning to get in the industry like that. I'm talking about like an outside perspective. I think they see like ethical hacking and maybe working on front end development and probably even UX UI design as the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Even more specifically, like people ask me about how to write AI tools. I'm like, I have no idea. I don't do AI, right?
Yeah.
Like I use the tools as well, just as much as you do. Yeah.
Last one, man. True or false? Being a software engineer is better than being a gym owner.
Very true. I don't know today. I'd be more interested to do it today. Yeah. Just because the education around has changed. But like I love the industry. Like I cannot say obviously there's pros and cons. I'm not gonna say it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? But the pros far outweigh the cons. Whereas as a gym owner, I would say the cons were pretty much they were pretty level with the pros. Most days outweighing the pros.
I can see that being a problem. All right, that was the last one there, and then this is the next section is the rapid fire questions. So this is pretty standard. I got 5 questions here. First one, front end or back end?
Front end for me personally.
Yeah. Tabs or spaces?
Tabs.
Thank God. I love tabs, man. I'm on this side.
It's just more efficient, honestly.
Yeah. VS Code or Sublime Text?
VS Code.
Yep. Windows, Mac, or Linux?
Mac.
Angular or Vue?
Since I've already got React, probably Angular.
Yeah. I like that.
For business purposes, honestly, like less for that views the inferior superior as a library.
No, you're going to create a war in the comment section.
That's my biggest concern. Don't come at please.
All right, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure of a time. I've really enjoyed this conversation, man, but I do have a couple last things for you. The first one of that is if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, maybe there's someone who's 18, 19, fresh out of high school, and maybe they're interested in doing this. If you can give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say two things. Don't let perfect be the enemy of great, and stay curious no matter how you can. It's very easy to lose the passion that got you here in the first place, right? Especially that, even if it was negative, this imposter syndrome, this like feeling of not being good enough. It's what drives you to be curious and, you know, look over your shoulder at everything you do. You know, there are positives of that you want to figure out healthy ways to still retain that. I would say that those are probably the two things that I would give myself as advice.
Nice. And this one is kind of similar, but let's see if the answer changes at all. Is any advice for someone that's 100% certain on really trying to progress in this field, and maybe they're an entry developer and they're looking to maximize their potential? Really, any advice you'd give them?
And get their, and are they working yet, or are they trying to get their first job?
No, an entry developer in this case, like someone that's in the industry. Maybe they're in their first job and are looking for ways to really progress.
Find a company that prioritizes your learning. Do not just join a company, like no matter how much they pay you or whatever, right? That is not focused on your first, I would say 2-3 years, entirely based on growing you to be like a senior. You that will pay itself in ways that you could not imagine. You will not get that in any other format. You need that type of mentorship in the company that you're at. So if the company is not doing that for you, find one that will. That's great.
That's great. Well, one last thing is, are you on any socials that you're willing to share, and can our viewers, where can our viewers find you?
Honestly, I'm not on a lot of socials, to be honest, but I do have my own podcast coming out. It's called Find the In. Me and another co-host of mine, who is a CTO of a company here, right? Like a bank company here. We do a podcast about figuring out how to break into different industries, different ideas, just like a very comprehensive approach and framework to understanding the world at large, so that you can better understand how to break into an industry or break into a career or break into maybe even a hobby or something. It's something that I've been working on with him now for almost 5 months now, and we're just about ready to go. Like I would say in the next month or month and a half, we're gonna finally start releasing, and I think that would probably be the big thing. That
oh man, that's exciting.
Yeah,
that's exciting. Well, as soon as you have a release on the first episode or on future episodes, definitely let us know, and we'll put that in the comment or in the description somewhere for people to check out. But man, I honestly can't thank you enough for coming on and just sitting down with me, having this chat. I really had a good time, had a lot of laughs, and just enjoyed this conversation, man. So thank you a lot for doing this.
Me too. It's an absolute pleasure. This is a incredibly great conversation, and I had a great time too, Aldo.
Thanks, man.